So I guess I'd love to start with, Kevin, how long have you known CJ? Like, where did kind of this come about? Were you privy to her work or to the book work before, or how did this all come about?
Sure. Well, I'd kind of known CJ for a few years. She'd interviewed me. She works for NPR in Kansas City, and she'd interviewed me several times in the past, and I kind of knew her that way, really. And then when she wrote the book, she's a colleague of another friend of ours, Sam Zeff, who
he's a producer.
He's a producer as well, and a journalist, and I've known him for many years. And we have a nonprofit organization that kind of produces our films, these small documentaries that we kind of make. And Sam suggested CJ's book because they really work together at KCUR, and it just seemed like such a great idea because the book was great. When I read the book, it was really great, really important. Mark and I are both Kansas natives, and Matt's been here in Kansas a long time now too, and so yeah, he's a official Kansan now, so whether he likes it or not, and so we just thought it was a great project to do, especially in light of the reality of the attacks in the last few years that the legislature has done on the LGBTQ community. And so we thought, a combination of CJ's book and that reality was a good project to put forward.
Yeah, it seems like since 2016, things have heightened to levels we've maybe not seen since Jim Crow.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, as a whole, I think most of our films deal with oppression in all the different forms of it, and this was something that was really close to home in terms of, we read it in our local newspaper every day. There would be another crazy attack on trans folks or gay folks or somebody, and it just felt like, CJ's book put it all in context in terms of the history of activism in the state, of LGBTQ activism in the state. And for me, particularly, I really was attracted to it because activism on a local level, especially a small town, is a different experience than activism like in a big city. I mean, because they can come after you in a small town, and they often do come after you in a small town. They come after your job, they come after your livelihood. You can easily kind of be blacklisted and ostracized and alienated and put in a corner somewhere, and so some of our stories deal with some of that, and so that part of it, I felt really connected to. I had experienced some of that in my activism in the past, and so it was just it seemed like it was the right time for the film.
I'm curious, with your presence on the film, did that change or amplify the opportunities for where this film could go? I mean, Kevin, your recent success is great with all the stuff with Spike, but I'm talking like your activism has been in the news for many years now. I'm curious, did that elevate the situation? Did it also maybe cause some fear about people coming out towards you guys?
Well, fortunately, I think we didn't kind of promote that angle of the story really so much. We kind of let people tell their story, and then we kind of, and I'll let these guys talk about that, because they both kind of bring elements to, how we approach, that issue really. We really kind of allow people to tell their story and then kind of put it through our point of view. But I'll let Mark.
Well, yeah, in the edit for sure, this was a real challenge to figure out what the story was and how we can get an audience into these lives of these people. And we started out with some history aspects and the activism from that CJ's book, but then really realized that where the current battles are is more in the anti-trans legislation and things like that. And so we started getting more interviews related to that and hearing some of the stories, which were just uplifting and heartbreaking, and sometimes at the same time. And so in the edit sessions, that was really the challenge. It's like, what is the story here? We want to touch on history, and we want to touch on some of the activists in the past that have helped bring some rights to people and fought the same-sex marriage ban and things like that. But really, it's the and often kids that are dealing with this stuff now, and the anti-trans stuff, and just a lot of fear that surrounds it. And it's just, as you said, things took a turn in 2016 in various places in this country, but in our home state of Kansas, it's both inspiring and both tragic, and the struggle just always goes on, and it's really frustrating. So that's really the story we're trying to bring out in the film.
As the editor, I've got to ask, how much footage did you have to go through?
I haven't done an exact measure, but we must have 25 to 30 interviews from 15 minutes to 2 hours, and a lot of footage. So what we're doing here is we called it a work in progress premiere screening kind of thing, because we still have some finessing to do, and we still have a final voice track and things to add. But it's pretty polished for what we're showing here, I think, hopefully. And it is. Hopefully we've got a story there that threads through it and ties into Kansas. We used some familiar elements that audiences will recognize. You can't, the name of the film, No Place Like Home, we tie in a little bit to the Wizard of Oz stuff. But a lot of footage. And there's whole interviews that we just didn't end up using because they just didn't, as we honed it over the last 2 years, right. Maybe 2 years of editing, but 2 more years of shooting and gathering stuff before that, I think. It's something like 4 years. So, a lot of footage. I would say up close to 100 hours of stuff to work with.
We'll give you a chance to answer this question. How big or small of a team was this? And in some of these smaller communities, how did you navigate filming this stuff? In these interviews and getting these people maybe out of the woodworks to talk?
Well, a lot of the pre-work for the interviews was important. Reaching out to individuals who had stories to tell, or relatives who had stories to tell of people who are sadly no longer with us, and that pre-work was very important. We always went out with a relatively small crew. It was, 3 or 4 people, and we didn't make any attempt to really hide who we were. We weren't coming in and getting, any shots by saying, well, we actually did a very good job, I think, of getting a sense of who these people were and the aspects of their story that were important for every area of this state. Going out to western Kansas for a few days to shoot footage out in some of the further areas, or bringing people in to meet with us here or there in Lawrence. I think we did a fair job of covering people from across the state with many different stories, many worthwhile stories that I'm glad that we were able to tell.
This is for you proper Kansas folk. I'm curious, how important was it that it was Kansas filmmakers doing this? And also, Kevin, your work with, in Lawrence in particular, we wouldn't know so many of the great stories of Fog Island and Wilt without you. So, I feel like you're already kind of a beloved figure there anyways. Sure. So did that help open the door? Yeah, sometimes I know. But how many doors are open just because the legacy you've already created, but also that you guys are Kansas owned?
Yeah, well, it's like Matt was saying. I think we come in a small crew. We try to not to be real obtrusive, coming in, taking over the world. We try to really come in humble and connecting to the folks' story. These stories in particular, a lot of them are very sensitive because several stories deal with loss, with family loss, and really tragic kind of elements to family loss. And So that's always really tricky. And to be honest with you, it was really Sam and CJ that handled a lot of the the going out and really finessing and setting the groundwork to make those interviews comfortable and trustworthy on our part, But I think the fact that we are Kansans and that which gives us in some ways the right to say certain things that we never hit down, we only hit up, and I think that gives people some trust about us, is that we're not going to pull any punches, but we're not going to hurt poor people or struggling folks or people whose their rights are being attacked upon. We're trying to defend those people, and we don't try to hide the fact that we have a point of view. We have a point of view. I mean, this is not a news thing coming in saying we're journalists. This is our take on what's happening in our state, and so we're just putting it out there in the context of CJ's book, which also comes from that same context, and we're just laying it out there and let people make their own minds up.
Yeah, and as someone who didn't grow up in this state, I grew up in California. It's a very liberal state. I had a lot of friends and family members and people that I worked with who were part of the LGBTQ community in Los Angeles. And moving to Kansas in '99, which I did, I've been able to see this change that's taken place in this state over the last 20 years, and it's been primarily a good change. I mean, I have a lot of students who are proudly out and members of the LGBTQ community. I love to see that happen. I love to see people who can feel now like they can be their genuine selves. And it also pains me to see some of the steps back that we're taking. So being able to participate in a project like this, I feel like this is one that we're doing for the angels. This is a project that we're really doing to not just open people's eyes and hearts and minds here, but also to let people across the United States and across the world see that this is a struggle that's still going on, but it's a struggle that we're on the right side of, or at least we're trying to stay on the right side of.
So yeah, for sure, I've traveled around enough and lived a few other places throughout my life, but there's something about Kansas, and I think we touch on it in various of our films that we've done together, that a lot of things start in Kansas. Wars start in Kansas and controversies, and yet in a lot of ways, I mean, I think what we say in a lot of our films, it's like, well, this is about Kansas, no place like home, but it's happening everywhere, and this issue, unfortunately, is being faced through many different states and three different places. So it's the lens of Kansas because that's where we're living and that's what we connect with. But we think this applies to all, throughout the country, and it really is trying to tell these stories that, I mean, there's a lot of good things going on in Kansas, and there's a lot of bad things going on, and that applies anywhere, right? I mean, that's it's not unique in that sense, but it's unique in the sense that this is where we're telling the stories, and these are stories that are pretty universal. So there's this combination of we're Kansans, we're telling this story in this venue, in this context, but it's going to apply to other places as well. And so, trans kids are struggling throughout the world, throughout the country, and so it's, once again, we're using Kansas as the lens, the local lens, to try to get down right to the dirt of the land and tell the stories that are happening right here. Dirt of the land, is that the right phrase?
That works for me.
Ground level is, what I'm saying. But again, it's really universal themes, I think.
Well, I think it's fitting to bring in Tallgrass because Wichita literally is the center of the state, or the country. In I think geographically, it is literally the closest thing to the middle of the country. So it's so fitting that Tallgrass very much is a kickoff point. Can y'all talk a bit about being able to show it to a Kansas audience, to know that the folks at Tallgrass, who for 20 years have been stubbornly independent, and get to see something that is their homegrown state as well?
Yeah, I'll let you take that one.
Well, we'll share it here. Well, yeah, I think it's a great place to really kind of premiere the film, and you know, several of the stories connect specifically to Wichita. You know, positive and negative. You know, some of our real trans heroes are from the Wichita area, and some of the people who are attacking folks are from this area. And so, you know, William Allen White was one of our recent films, and William Allen White had a saying that it happens in Kansas first. Everything always happens in Kansas first, and it's amazingly, he's right. The best example recently was the abortion vote. I mean, that happens in Kansas first, and now we become this kind of signpost for like the stubborn opposition, the stubborn fight back, the being stubbornly independent, and we hope that this film, you know, kind of reveals a lot of that local opposition that kind of get away with it these days. You know, the folks who are making life hell for a lot of trans and gay folks in the legislature in particular, they kind of they take their shots, and then there's not a lot of repercussions because of it. I mean, safe to say, I think they kind of get away with it. And because there's no kind of, you know, real journalistic opposition to it in terms that makes their life uncomfortable in any kind of way. And there's some opposition out there, journalistic opposition, but I don't think it can really make their life uncomfortable. They get to hide behind their base of support, and they get to kind of continue to do their thing. And so one of the things we hope with the film is that we kind of expose those people, and a larger audience gets to see what they're doing kind of behind the scenes, where most people are too busy to pay a lot of attention to it. And so on that local scene, these are local figures that I think some people are going to be shocked at how big of a jerk these people actually are, and that's kind of part of our job as filmmakers to kind of expose that.
With that in mind, how do we extend this past the film? Like, I know this is going to be with you guys for years. It already has been. How do you keep the motivation going to continue this fight in face of people who may not have, like you said, anything telling them not to do it?
Well, I'll let the guys talk about this too, but I'll just quickly say, kind of one of the roles of the film, one of the hopes we have for the film, from my point of view, is that by identifying these individuals and kind of identifying the problems and the attacks that they have made and are making on various folks in the state, that people will kind of see that it's okay to fight back publicly. That you know, making a film like this kind of gives people permission a little bit, and that's the thing that you hope that we help in terms of what the film can help, is that, you know, we help you get permission to talk back, to fight back, and to do it in a public way.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've always said about, you know, the films that Kevin and I have made, and Kevin and Mark and I have made over the last 20 years, is that the film is only half over when the credits are rolling. It's the discussions that come out after the film where people say, "Oh, I never realized that, you know, that these people are going through these struggles, or that these things have happened, or that this is the point of view that's being expressed by this person in Topeka." You know, that discussion that's going to happen after the film is over is really where hopefully a lot of the changes in people's hearts and minds is going to take place, where they're going to say, this is how I felt about this subject beforehand, but after I've seen what these people have been through, hopefully this is going to change, the way that people are going to think about this from here on out. I mean, the real struggle with this film has been the fact that this is a constantly changing narrative, that there is this constant change in approach to LGBT issues and trans issues throughout the state, throughout the nation. And the problem with this film is that things are still changing. This is still very fluid, but there comes a point where this is going to be a snapshot of these people and their struggles at this point in time. You have to put your foot in the river somewhere and say, at this point, this film is done. Because we were talking about this. Our last interview was in August for this film, and things are still changing. Things are still going to be changing, but hopefully we've done a good job of taking a picture, a portrait of where things are now, and hopefully things are going to get better past this point once people see where we're at and what we put together.
I think the first interview, if I remember right, was the summer of 2019, if I remember the footage. Yeah. We have footage from picnic and Gay Pride Parade here in Wichita, I believe, and things like that. I think that was the summer of 2019. I don't want to give too much away, but we'll be watching this. But one of the things that I think filmmakers can bring to these sorts of, and especially filmmakers like us, who, we learn so much. Kevin and I learning in the Edit Bay, learning about these issues, and not necessarily, having firsthand experience, but certainly having friends and family and things like that. But why Kansas can tell this story is because Kansas also has, and I'm going to bring it up. Fred Phelps was a presence in Kansas for so long, and they're still there. And I went and saw the Melissa Etheridge concert, our soon-to-be narrator for this film, and there they were, the Phelps crowd out in front there. Got my phone out. Some of that footage makes it into the film. Yes. But I think one of the crux of what the film brings out, and it was a combination, but I think it was probably Kevin that made this connection of, oh, well, that's the Phelps crowd. Oh, yeah, they're so radical. And yet, the arguments that are still being made in the legislature are just the same Phelps arguments reworded and put into law, or trying to be put into law. And I think that might surprise a lot of people, especially that are further on the conservative side of things. Like, oh, well, I'm not that. But you kind of are if you're making these choices and you're still, torturing these kids that are trying to figure out who they are in the world. And I think that's one of the most powerful things. And again, I'm giving that away a little bit here, but I want to make sure people catch that, and I think they will from the film. And I think that's one of the things that really became kind of eye-opening as we saw these tactics and things like that. And it's just like, wow, they're not that different. They're just camouflaging it in a different way. And that's something that, as a Kansan, I've been embarrassed about for years, thanks to the publicity that the Fred Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church are able to rummage up from,
The word tactics, can we talk about that it is strategic? It is not just, they may make it seem like it's not strategic, but there is a long history of this type of tactical way of doing it. Going back to Jim Crow, this is the way it's been done for hundreds of years. I mean, race has only been an issue because racists made it an issue. How do we combat that tactic? Maybe films like this.
I was going to say, that's why we make film. I mean, I think that's one of the first steps. But I think it's making those connections and having the experience. I mean, I think there's things that we did in What's the Matter with Kansas, that connect directly with what we're seeing here. I mean, so much of what that film connected with was what happened in 2016 in the United States, too. I mean, we made a lot of connections that I think were made many years, by William Allen White, and things he fought against back in, and again, whether that's the goat gland doctor or the getting the Klan run out of Kansas, is, these things are still going on.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Mark is saying, that the tactic thing in particular, the tactic thing is you see it in the ads for the governor that's running against, our governor, Laura Kelly right now, and the whole thing of, trans women in sports. No one is upset about, girls who transition into guys, but they're only upset about guys that transition into girls, and that whole thing of it's unfair to women's sports, and you see those ads against Governor Kelly. And they've made it a tactical issue nationally. The fact that it's in ads in Kansas, that this, that it's like my daughter over here or my son over here, you're taking their life and you're turning it into a political attack ad on somebody. It's like, wow. And see, that is the Jim Crow element to it, because that's the same thing that a liberal person who, said, went down south or was from the South and they said they were for integration, and then that tactic would be used. Well, he's for integration. He gave somebody a job, and a black person a job here, and they use that thing against them politically, and the fact that everything that we now kind of brag about as Americans, everything that we brag about in terms of rights specifically, have all come through this same struggle. And years from now, I will predict that this same thing that these people are so upset about right now, attacking trans kids specifically about right now, saying that is so unfair to women's sports, that they'll be celebrating trans kids playing sports in a few years. But the problem is there's going to be a lot of pain and suffering, just like it was in the civil rights movement, that has to go through to get to that process to achieve those goals. And that's really the thing that we don't learn from our history. I mean, that's the thing that the opposition, they've learned from it. That's why they're exercising this tactic. They know that tactic. It's the only tactic they have. It never changes. It just goes on to new issues and wide different varieties of folks. And so I'm really pleased that we're able to kind of identify that in a specific way about things happening in Kansas.
So, gentlemen, I'd love to kind of wrap it up by getting back at that first part of the title in the connection to Wizard of Oz, because I do think it's Kansas, first of all, but it's also what Julie Garland's life has meant to the LGBT community in particular. I think is a crazy connection point as well. How fitting is it that it is Wizard of Oz, the film that is very much celebrated in that community, and also the unique diversity in the film itself. A lion, the metal man, like these are all maybe can be replaced by images of the difference we see in our real lives. How important is it that it is No Place Like Home?
Well, I mean, one of the things we say in the film is that the Wizard of Oz, which, you can't be from Kansas and have traveled anywhere outside of the state without getting the whole, you're not in Kansas anymore, and, Dorothy and Toto and all that stuff. And as much as Kansans probably get a little tired of hearing that, it was fun for us, I think, to embrace that finally, and to kind of say, yes, that is kind of what we're known for. And that metaphor has taken on a real kind of liberating, world-liberating, symbolism and metaphor. That the pride flag, the LGBTQ flag, the rainbow flag comes out of the Wizard of Oz. It has those connections to the Wizard of Oz. And the person that made that flag is from Parsons, Kansas. And and so all of these metaphors and these symbols that are now world known, internationally known, they all originated here and kind of out of the struggle of someone dealing with the problems of identity at home, the problems that they experienced at home here, and then most of them having to leave their home to find liberation and freedom and self-expression about their selfhood. And now things have gotten better. And one of the things the movie does, we go after the bad guys, but you also see how far we've come. And you see the reasons why, Kansas, the elements that it's not a bad place to live here, I think, for an LGBTQ person. And it's gotten a lot better than it was in the past. The struggle continues. There's still some real rednecks out here trying to make folks' lives hell. But it's definitely better than it used to be, and it's going to get even better. And I think all of that comes from the Kansas experience of the struggle for freedom.
There's not a better way to end it. Thank you, Mark, Kevin, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thank you.